You're watching episode number 104 of CXO-Talk, and today we're going to be talking about enterprise software and empowered, I was going to say computers, but I meant consumers, and digital transformation. I'm Michael Krigsman, and my co-host is Vala Offshore. Hey, Vala, how are you?
Michael, I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm excellent. Vala, we're here today with Alan Trefler, who is the CEO of Pegasystems.
I'm super excited to learn from Alan. Alan, thank you very much for joining our show. Could you tell us a little bit about your background and also a little bit about company Pegasystems?
Sure. Well, my background actually is a sort of traditional computer science going back a long ways. I started as an English major, but realized that I wasn't going to be able to make a living at that in my freshman year. But since then, I've worked in a variety of capacities, and the genesis of Pega came when I was working really as a systems integrator, trying to help large companies really figure out how to improve service and get better effectiveness out of the whole business and IT dialogue. And as I was looking at that problem in the 80s, I thought to myself, boy, these computers are getting really fast. Why are we still doing the sort of programming and suffering the service dislocations like they might have done in the 70s? And from that came this idea, this inspiration, that it should be possible to enable organizations to do a better job of engaging with their clients by making it possible for business and IT to be able to interact differently, to be able to allow the business people to really drive the show much, much more. And that really was the synthesis of the idea that ultimately led to Pegasystems and led to where we are now.
And so this was something that you were thinking about 30 years ago, which is kind of amazing because this issue of the relationship between business and IT and connection with the customer is as contemporary as any issue in enterprise software today.
Well, back then it might have been a little advanced. Now it is so mainstream. And yet you see so few organizations being able to do a really good job of both connecting with their clients across the entire customer lifecycle, or doing a good job of having IT and the business work effectively together. And by changing the fundamental way business and IT work together, we think you can bring a culture of responsiveness and customer engagement to the very way the company works.
So Pegasystem is known globally as a BPM platform, and yet you're focusing the company towards customer relationship management and other strategic applications. Can you, and we have an audience that includes venture capitalists, tech analysts, CXOs, but we also have folks that are trying to learn about business and enterprise software. Can you, in English simple terms, talk about BPM and then transition to CRM?
Yeah, I can try, but let me tell you that before the pretty, I think, ugly, TLA, that's a three-letter acronym, BPM was used. The space originally was sort of described by a sort of another ugly word that was called workflow. People thought that all they needed to do was manage the workflow between the customer and the business and inside the business, and we always thought that was really horrible because you don't really want to flow the work around. You want to do it. We never got work due to stick. And likewise, when we're in the BPM space, we really see what we do as much more than just managing business processes. What this is about bringing together processes, case management, analytics, customer interaction, and self-service by creating a model of how the institution wants to deal with its customers, how it wants responsiveness to work. And from that model, our system writes the code. Now, the right way, I think, to position this is customer in, which is why we've wholeheartedly embraced the concept of customer relationship management as being actually the most effective description of the ultimate value we think we're bringing to organizations.
Makes sense.
So you've been shifting the company away from BPM, or is that not quite right? Really building upon BPM in order to emphasize that interaction with the customer. Is that correct, as I understand it?
So I think that having core elements of BPM technology, and by the way, if you look at both Gartner and Forrester, you'll see that we're rated staggeringly highly in terms of really leading the BPM space. But we think that if you're going to serve the customer, if you're going to go beyond sort of old school CRM to what it needs to evolve to, you really need to bring together a whole set of customer-oriented concepts that build upon concepts like BPM, but also bring in predictive and adaptive analytics, that also bring in case management to manage the customer across channels and from front to back, and that bring in self-service and dynamic responsiveness to the whole user experience. That means you don't have to write custom systems for your mobile phones and for your websites, that you're able to have one brain across them all. So we think that the customer moniker, the customer-oriented description, is the right umbrella, and we're in a unique position with a technology that really unifies all of these elements and makes it much, much easier for organizations to respond to clients.
Where do you see your primary role as the CEO of Pega in terms of, shepherding this transformation and creating, real compelling value to your customers?
Well, as the CEO, we're now about a $600 million company last year, over 3,000 staff. So we've now got the mass and muscle to do meaningful things. And my core element of my role is to make sure that the team is working together to set the right strategy, that we're pointed in the right direction, we're thinking a couple of years ahead at all times, not just worrying what's going to happen this year or next, and that we're really focused not just on where the puck is, but as they say in hockey, to where it's going to go. So that strategic element, I think, is critical. But ultimately, at any scale, let alone our scale, having a highly capable and committed team that really wants to do a good job for our clients is, I think, central to the sort of talent management aspects of the job. And I think the keeper of the culture is the other thing that I think CEOs need to worry about. And our culture is very much one where it's open to challenging our assumptions, making sure that people feel comfortable questioning any decision, my decision, up until the point we decide it's final, at which point we all got to hustle together and make sure that it happens. So I think those are the key elements. I think it's strategy, it's team, and it's culture that are not just for me. I think for any good CEO, that's what they worry about.
Alan, how has this changed? Obviously, the company has grown over the course of 30 years, but you founded the company, and so the role has had to have adapted along with the company. So how has the role changed over time?
Well, the role changes at predictable stages in the growth of a company. When you're the first 3 and then 8 folks operating in a walk-up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, your prime goal is survival. I mean, it's really just, can we put together a vision that is both expansive but practical, so somebody will actually buy it. We bootstrapped the company, which I think made particularly the early times a bit tougher, but now means we weren't forced to sell out or get I think chopped into bits like a lot of the VC companies are. So the early days, it was all what I would describe as a lot of direct heavy lifting. Today, I'm responsible for remarkably little directly that would happen, that comes out the doors here. It's really about the team who is thinking about it, and my job today is to have moved very much from I think doing lots of stuff myself, though frankly it's been many decades since anybody's ever let me write a line of computer code. I can just tell that to any clients. They don't have to worry that I was kicked out of that business a long time ago. But to now making sure that we're challenging the right assumptions and that we're digging into the right problems and the right opportunities. So to do that, involves dealing with clients, which I love to do. It involves doing deep dives in architecture, make sure that I'm keeping current on where technology is going, and that we're actually challenging the right assumptions about what we've done historically, and also making sure that we're building an engine that's capable of servicing what's now a large client base that does some pretty amazing things for world-class brands, companies like American Express, who we're privileged to work with, or United Health, the largest healthcare provider in the U.S. We deal with organizations that depend on us, and we need to make sure that we are both visionary but also substantive in how we deliver to them now.
We had in one of our previous shows John Hagel, who's a co-chair of Deloitte's think tank, and he talked about the delicious paradox of digital business disruption. And studies that talk about original companies on the S&P Fortune 500 average age used to be 75 years old in the 60s, and today it's approaching 10 years. And every 2 weeks a company falls off the S&P 500 and a new one joins. And so as you sit there as a CEO of a great, fantastic, successful company, what are some of the challenges that you think about in terms of managing what Hegel referred to as delicious paradox, where companies can grow and companies can die depending on how quickly they adapt?
Well, I see that paradox with sort of two sides to it. On one hand, it's a wonderful opportunity for us, because if you think about what we're trying to do, we're trying to help meaningful companies engage with their clients, and today that's all about going digital. And there's so much confusion, so many mistakes being made in the way that companies are doing it, that we see a lot of opportunity to be able to try to be thought leaders in this space and show firms both the things to avoid and the things to do. The other sort of side of the page, though, has more to do with Pega and how, despite the fact that we've got a great customer list, we're thrilled with how our products are rated and how they perform, we need to be ferocious about avoiding complacency. There are lots of changes out there that we need to make sure we're responding to. Some of them are technology changes, some of them are go-to-market changes, and all of them could be as dangerous to us as the disruption is to the folks in that the Fortune 500.
So you're talking about strategy and thinking through the components of the market and so forth, and you are a very serious, and you've been a very successful chess player. As a matter of fact, last year at your conference, I understand you played 20 simultaneous games and you only lost one, and that was to another chess master. So
well, it is true. That was the first time we did it, but it was a big hit. And at our next conference, which is June 7 to 9, this time in Orlando, we're going to do another one of those 20-seat simuls as well. So it was actually both a lot of fun, and I think a lot of the spectators enjoyed it because we had live play-by-play sort of calling of the positions to make it live and to make it interesting to the observers. So yeah, I'm going to do that again. But is your question basically how do I get from chess to computers, or does it influence my days?
Well, I was really interested in the link between chess and strategic thinking in business.
I think it can be dangerous sometimes to sort of draw too much on games like chess. Or I understand one of you is a backgammon master, actually, on the phone here with me today. But I do think there's a lot of connection between at least how I think about strategy and how I think about chess. When I think about the thought process that a strong player goes to, it seems to me that it really falls into three phases. The first phase is pattern recognition. We very quickly, one of the things humans are great at, does this position or some of the elements of this position feel like something I've seen? Can that sort of guide me into where I want to do my deeper exploration? The second step is then a more detailed analysis. If I go here and they go there, and I go here and they go there, what's going to occur? And the reason the pattern recognition is so important is it lets you focus your analysis and go deeper in the places that make the most sense. And then finally, one of the things that I do is just before I make a move, I sort of try to sit back and say, okay, what the hell have I missed? What disaster is out here that's lurking that my assumptions about the patterns or the calculations I've done somehow might have eluded me? Is there some mate in three that's there that has nothing to do with my strategy, but may come, rip the guts out of my position if I'm not paying attention? And I think by being able to put together those three phases, a chess master, a chess player is able to both, be effective in how they make decisions and also prevent against risks and uncertainties. I think that's very much how, at least I think about business. You want to be strategic, you want to see the patterns, you want to be open to new patterns, you want to use that to focus your analysis. And then you always want to say, hey, look, what are my pre-existing biases? What are the things that that I might have done last time that are influencing me where it may no longer be appropriate. And it's that sort of check step that I think is also really critical in both business and chess.
Alan, you wrote a book about customer engagement called Built for Change, which discussed relationship between customers and companies. Can you summarize what you call the coming of customer apocalypse?
Well, it is a mouthful. We call it. You've heard of the zombie apocalypse, and that's something that obviously makes the TV shows a lot. This is the customer apocalypse. So the customers are going to sort of rise up, not like zombies, but like pretty antagonistic legions that are going to actually be able to either make companies highly successful or eviscerate them. And in the book, I talk about this sort of Gen D. Everyone talks about the Gen C, connected generation, millennials, all this we've heard many times before. There's a really interesting dynamic that we're seeing in which there's this Gen D that has grown up on all of that, but really likes to either devour companies. They're just in love. They're like Apple fanboys, or they love Lush and cosmetics from them, or they want to devour companies, sort of chew them up and actively kill them. These are folks who are not happy to just tell a couple friends. They go tweeting and using social media and other mechanisms to really actively injure firms. It was interesting. I read the other day that there's now this .sucks domain name.
Yes, I read about that.
There,
yes.
where companies are actually having to pay $2,500 per site to buy a .sucks name to prevent people from basically saying, company XYZ .sucks. That strikes me as a very Gen D sort of thing, that somebody would actually buy a domain name and actively go out to de-promote a firm. It's this sort of added pressure, coupled with the fact that if you can get these folks to stick with you, they can also be very, very passionate about how they promote a firm, that has raised the stakes, I believe, for the leading brands in the world.
We have a question from Twitter, from Mandy Bishop, who's asking, based on your comments, it seems like senior executives need to be data scientists. Any thought about the role of data scientists, data science in being a senior exec these days?
Well, I think that execs definitely need to appreciate the role of data, but I think that a lot of this is less data science and more about ability to execute. I see lots of companies that actually kind of know that they have to make a change. The change is fundamental. Give you an example. A customer that goes to their website and calls their contact center gets a horrifically different set of offers and different experience. I don't need to be a data scientist to know that a client needs to be treated well in every channel that they want to be engaging. So I think, the way, and I talk about this in my book, the way I think about it is there are really three things. There's data, and data is important. But in the human metaphor, data is like memory. It's about what's happened. The second element, which builds on that data, is insight, it's judgment, it's intent. It enables you to take the context provided by the data and form good decisions. That's where the data scientist would come in. But the third part is even more important. It's being able to execute, being able to bring the sort of process to the fore, to get it so the process starts with the client, quick fulfillment, works seamlessly across channels. In the human metaphor, that's muscle. Just having sort of smart brains but not being able to execute is no better than just being muscle and having no brains. At least then you can try stuff and see what works and what doesn't work. I think even more than data science, which is part of our product line and we think is important, is the ability to have that build for change muscle. So you can use your insights to try something, do champion challenger analyses, be able to try different things with different populations, and have it execute across your entire business. That's what you need, frankly, at least as much as the brains.
So this natural shift of expectations in this digital connected economy, what are some of the implications that you see as you guide and mentor and service your customers in terms of brand and the ability to sell?
Well, I think that one of the things that we see is actually a pretty sad and frankly perhaps understandable mistake that certain customers are making, that they're now, some of them are realizing they're making. And to explain that mistake, let me go back a decade or a little more and talk about what happened when everybody decided they needed to be on the web. Well, some companies thought, boy, the internet's going to be important. We need to make it so it works as a part of our operation. And most companies actually set up separate organizations or divisions or groups to go and bring them to the web, bring them to the internet. Now, unsurprisingly, those groups became incredibly disconnected from the rest of the business. And that's what led to these dislocations that now these Gen Ders are finding unacceptable when something is offered, for example, online but not in the contact center, or I want to be able to use it on my mobile device, and suddenly it's different there than it is someplace else. That's some of the stuff that really upsets people, which, by the way, leads to the mistake that's happening now. This whole idea of going mobile first, which you hear a lot of people talking about, well, that might make sense if you're Uber and all you're basically doing, and most of what you're doing, is the mobile device. But if you're a business of pretty much any size that operates across multiple channels, going mobile first runs the strong risk of building into that mobile channel logic, rules, processes that are then going to intrinsically either diverge from the rest of your business or put enormous cost pressures on your business as you go and have to re-implement in multiple places. Our vision of what the future of customer service, CRM, and process is that you really need a brain in your organization that can reach out into each of these channels. The mobile channel and multiple sizes of mobile channel, phone, iPad, on the web, pushing into the internet side, in the contact center, in the physical branch location if one exists, and that brain needs to be able to create a model for your business that doesn't get mired in some quick fix single channel solution. And so, we see a lot of companies now understanding that. They've had their flirtation with trying to whip together some mobile apps. They're seeing their satisfaction scores not improving in the way that they want it. And they're actually, I think, just beginning to see this the way that's going to empower them in the future.
So, Alan, let's dig into this for a moment. It seems that the general issue that you're raising here is the ability for companies to develop equal skill and capability across all of the different channels through which they interact with their customer, whether it's mobile web or whatever it might be, right? So isn't that the underlying issue, is how to develop the skills and capabilities to interact with customers across all of these channels equally, with equal strength?
So I think understanding how important that is a key part of beginning this journey correctly. But there's another really insidious problem that is separating out the ones who are failing from the ones who are going to succeed. And that has to do with, all right, we know we want to do something, but how do we figure out exactly what to do and who should do it? And the solution to that is to get business and IT to work together in a completely different way. I started Pega because when I was working at some of the largest, allegedly state-of-the-art financial institutions on Wall Street, I was appalled by the way that they wrote software. They would have the business people write these big requirements documents. They'd pass them over to us. We'd do functional and technical decomposition. And then at the end of it, we'd sort of type cryptic words into text files and compile them. Now, the irony is 30 years later, computers massively more powerful than we ever could have imagined. We've made some changes. We don't call them specs anymore. We call them user stories. But the whole process by which business defines what they want and then gets it done in software, which is so critical to running businesses these days, is staggeringly and agonizingly manual. If you think about any other industry, think about manufacturing. The advent of computer-aided design made it possible for me today to go and perhaps build a wireframe document or that describes a cup, or describes this camera, or describes, well, anything that might exist in the real world, allow it to be passed off to somebody else to tweak it. The program will make sure the physics are respected, make sure that you're not going to create something that's going to just break when it comes out of the mold. And today with 3D printing, I can go from concept to specialization to actual fulfillment seamlessly. It's all connected. How does that compare to the way the technical systems work? Those computer systems in the mobile device, in the front office, any place in the organization on the web, those are all written in garbage code that has nothing to do, is unconnected to the business requirements. So I think, Mike, if you really want to put it together, it's kind of the conjunction of these two things. It's understanding you need to have seamless service experiences that go across channels, and at the same time, to gain agility, you need to change the very way that business and IT work together, so it's not all about translating things into the gobbledygook of the machine. That the dialogue about what's getting built can happen at a higher level of metaphors than programming languages in machines and random specs in documents. Does that make sense? It's those two things, I think, Mike, that have to come together.
Sure.
Yes, I think. So, what are the implications then? What are the down on the ground practical implications for enterprise buyers? Enterprise buyers of software such as yours or other enterprise software companies. In other words, the brands, I should say.
So, I think it's interesting. I think the first implication of all of this massive change is, it's like the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe. It's don't panic. What we're seeing in lots of enterprises is what I would describe as almost panicked reactions to stuff speeding up, but them not knowing how to deal with it. And some of that you see with this sort of what I would describe as flight to inadequate solutions in the cloud. Now, don't get me wrong, we run on the cloud. The cloud is incredibly important in having changed how people think about both cost structures and purchasing approaches to software, and I think it's tremendous. However, what you're seeing is customers really falling into a lot of sort of traps that are ultimately not going to let them put together a coherent experience. Now, this isn't true for systems that, for example, help things like internal administration and other bits that aren't fundamental to the strategy of the business. But if you're dealing with things that are strategic to the business, just being able to get a quick fix in the cloud isn't going to get you all the way there. So I think what customers need to do is step back and ask themselves, how am I going to make sure that what I'm going to do to try to improve service is going to work across all my channels? And that doesn't happen. How am I going to make it so it can scale up to be able to deal with the actual complexities of my business? So that I'm not just tracking stuff. Remember that workflow stuff I talked about? Lots of these systems just flow things around and track them. I'm actually able to get the intelligence in to the point of contact with the client and as far up the stream as possible, because there's something that actually understands rules and processes and the things that my business needs to control. And those are the types of things I think that the implications for business buyers today in the enterprise is, first, I think they need to take a breath and ask themselves what's going to really make them have strategic outcomes. The second big deal has to do with changing that business-IT relationship, where it can't be business running off and just buying stuff because they're frustrated with IT. It can't be IT continuing to have lists of, yes, you can have this in 2021. It's got to be that business needs to be able to take more sort of active roles, more empowered roles in being able to actually help construct the real software. And what that does is it actually gets the business and IT folks really on the same page and puts all the smart minds to work. So I think that business and IT relationship, changing that has got to be a first principle to making this all work properly.
So do you think companies are panicking when they hire chief digital officers? A couple of years ago on LinkedIn, there was probably less than 100, and now we're approaching about 2,000 CDOs. And is it because you just mentioned almost like, and Gartner I think refers to this as bimodal IT, where you maintain operational excellence, but you're also quick to adapt to what the line of business needs. All of this, let's call it disruption around us with consumerization of IT, mobile, social, cloud, big data, Internet of Things. How are we going to, help IT and CIOs to meet the demand of their internal customers and then certainly their paying external customers?
Well, I think that central to what you're talking about is whether companies actually think they can hire a chief digital officer, have the appropriate pedestal there and not have to worry about that in the rest of the business. That's just crazy. Digital is going to sort of underlie the entire future of these businesses. It's going to be absolutely central to how these businesses work. So you can hire a chief digital officer to sort of be the tip of the spear, to sort of help everybody understand where they're going. But if those business operations and if the existing IT organization is not completely committed to working together hand in hand on that digital agenda, then frankly those people are not going to be part of a successful business, because the digital it's like electricity. It's kind of like you had to rewire the buildings and the factories. You couldn't just have light in one room. It's got to be throughout. It's got to touch everything.
So basically, hiring a chief digital officer without undertaking the broader transformation across the company is the thing that you're saying is just not going to work.
And that's correct. It's going to be like, frankly, if I'm making up the analogies on the fly, but it's kind of like the days of mainframe computing. You had a computer in a big single room blocked off from the rest of the company. Stuff came in and out a little window. It was really important. I mean, look at Mad Men. The computer there sits right in the middle of the floor. But let's face it, what's really made business work today is this proliferation of digital power. That's going to happen end to end in companies. And the worst part of not having the business understand the technology better is they don't know what to ask for. In my book, I draw an analogy to what would it be like if you wanted to either build a house or make a massive addition, and you'd never been to Home Depot. You just had to sort of imagine what the off-the-shelf parts were, the easy things. You'd have to imagine what would be easy and what would be hard, and you'd end up asking for lots of things that were really complicated and expensive. That's the way it works today. On the other hand, if you've walked through Home Depot and you've seen things like French doors and you've seen things like bay windows, you can have a really, really intelligent conversation with your architect, and they may push back and say, no, you really don't want that. But suddenly you're talking about things being sort of off the shelf in places where that's adequate or actually even better. That's what has to happen for organizations to get digital. The business people need to understand what's possible, what's easy, what's expensive, what's not. And like any other good business person, that will influence how they engage with the rest of the organization. If the chief digital officer is out there, just sort of driving on their own, responding to requests from the business, they won't get smart requests unless digital has percolated through the company.
Sure. Well, Pegasystems certainly over the last 30 years has evolved and changed significantly, and it's incredible success. But how do you identify, as the CEO, where the company needs to evolve and change? Is it just being at the ground level and being engaged with your direct reports and their direct reports, engaging with customers? I mean, how do you stay ahead of digital disruption?
Well, as Mike will appreciate, the first thing you do is you listen to this series.
This is where it begins.
I hope everyone can hear rewind.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
I mean, that's central. Now, once you've done that, and then I think the most important thing.
By the way, the billboard is going up this week, so thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. But the reality is you've got to be open to input from all different sources. So the world is so wonderfully connected. It's easy to see what competitors are doing, what potential new entrants are doing. It's easy to see what your clients are doing using your technology. If like ours, it's something that becomes visible, and what their competitors are doing. So you can get a real sense as to how your customers are going to fare as competitors, as they always do, change and evolve what they do. So I think first you have to have a culture of receptivity, and then you need to explicitly go out there seeking opportunities to try new stuff. Part of us trying to have a culture of innovation that's central to the company is we actually, for example, have hackathons, and we will go and we'll challenge our engineering and our project management teams to come up with stuff that we might not normally fund, and then out of those we got lots of tremendous and excellent ideas. We try to work with academic communities. We're here in Cambridge near MIT, for example, is right next door. That's always a great place to get sort of ideas. And just being receptive is, I think, the place it starts, and then challenging your assumptions. What if things we're thinking turn out to be wrong? And that's part of that when I was talking about the chess example. That's that third part where you say, oh my God, what have I missed? What patterns was I following when one of my presumptions was that I wasn't going to get mated in 3? That's the other part of it, I think, as well.
You've made some acquisitions, and on the subject of innovation, to what extent do you view acquisitions as an adjunct or a means of innovation in addition to your own internal innovation efforts?
Well, I think being open to looking at companies and acquiring them means you're going to be seeing lots of stuff. So I view that as being a very important part of our sort of intellectual curiosity. And then we see things that make sense, we'll buy them. So that, to my mind, is a pretty important part of knowing what else is going out there, meeting some of the right people to help you, think fresh. And so that's important for innovation. But unlike a lot of companies that do acquisitions, when we acquire a firm, and a number of the acquisitions we've had are really, you think of as sort of, technology adjuncts, really helping our technology do better in terms of sentiment analysis or mobility or predictive and adaptive analytics. When we do an acquisition, we're committed to building that technology into a unified platform with the rest of our architecture. One of the problems with a lot of acquisitions is people end up with all these sort of multiple lumps of stuff that get glued together in the PowerPoints, but are very, very hard for customers to use. I sometimes refer to that as the Frankenstack. You got offerings that are, Frankenstein was lots of dead people sewed together. You have offerings that are like lots of dead software companies. And typically those are, which, by the way, we compete with a lot of those, but typically those, I think, don't really meet the cost and agility needs of the customers that are out there.
Alan, we have a lot of, or we've had a lot of startup CEOs as our guests, from Brian Halligan of HubSpot to Aaron Levy of Box, and then some smaller startups who are waiting to become billion-dollar public companies. But what advice do you have for entrepreneurs and startup founders if they're about to come and pitch to you? What do you look for? How should they prepare? Please guide some of our audience members who are running businesses today and are looking to achieve the success that you and Pegasystems have achieved.
Well, I'd welcome them to achieve much more success, to tell you the truth. We're not done by a long shot. So, we're actually pretty excited and looking to amp up our growth so we become more meaningful to more customers. But, in terms of lessons that might not be obvious, I think an obvious lesson is be prepared for it to be harder than you think it's going to be. I think folks who come in and do pitches with all these crazy numbers in Excel, driven by formulas, that's just silly. And if they're going to have numbers and projections, you need to think about what are some of the things that are going to go wrong, and how you're going to make sure that the business is going to be able to accommodate them. That shouldn't scare you, but it should, make you a little bit sober, because it's a difficult experience. The other thing I'll say in terms of a bit of perhaps unusual advice is I'd say to be very cautious about putting academics on your board of directors.
Wow.
Yeah, which is interesting, because we use them as consultants, we love them, but at the end of the day, what I found is I won't say all, but some of the academics that I've had the opportunity to work with, sometimes it can be more of sort of an academic exercise in the boardroom, as opposed to really digging in, making a hard decision, and not sort of arguing things to death. So I'll just say that in terms of something that I've learned along the way.
Alan, talk to us about venture capital and starting a company with VC money investment versus bootstrapping, which is what you did.
Well, look, I think there's a role for venture capital, but software is not a very capital-intensive business. And the problem with venture capital, which is a very, very serious problem, is that it typically puts a 5 or 7 year sort of fuse on a business, at which point the venture fund most typically either needs to sell to liquidate the company so it can pay the investors, or the company is ready to go public, which a lot of companies aren't, or at that stage. So I'm a fan of actually making sure that CEOs and companies have enough time to get it right. I mean, look at Apple, now the most the most successful company in the world, arguably, and it took them a long time to get it right. I can remember the first time I held a Newton. It took them a couple of slots to get us to this iPhone generation. So part of what I think is important is this is going to be a significant part of your life, and I believe that for anybody who's a founder or early in a startup, it's going to end up being a pretty important part of your life. Make sure that the funding and make sure the other elements, make sure the partnership with the people you work with is going to let you sustain your dream to a reasonable fruition level. Because I just see too many folks who are forced to sell at a level they consider premature, and then inevitably a year or two later they've left the companies at the bottom. They're unhappy at the one level. They may be rich, but at one level their dream has not been fulfilled. Their customers in the B2B world, and in the world in which I sell to, are devastated by these acquisitions. Customers hate these companies being acquired because they know what happens. They know the innovation is going to leave, the maintenance rates are going to be jacked up, they're going to lose all the benefits that made them want to work with an innovative company. So I think it's actually very beneficial to be able to show and live the level of passion that it takes to be either a startup or a company that doesn't take very much venture money or takes it from sources that don't have that fuse on it.
That's terrific advice. Any final thoughts about perhaps culture of venture capital?
Well, I think the culture of venture capital, look, it's all about the Benjamins in the venture capital world, right? And you can find ones who care about customers and products. And if you're going to work with one, make sure you've checked the references and that you're getting one who actually takes pride in their work. I think that pride in one's work is, for me, one of the fundamental values that separates great employees from average employees who do a job, and separates great companies from companies that are just going to punch somebody's ticket. And ultimately, I think investing in making sure that you'll be able to have pride in your work, you'll get the chance to do that, is the thing that I find very powerful in terms of what motivates me. And I think most really successful entrepreneurs will share that characteristic.
We're just about out of time, but let me ask you one final question. Are you yourself investing in startups? Do you have relationships with startups? How does that work, and what's your thinking on that?
So I have on occasion, but not very much. The reality is that I'm pretty heavily invested in Pegasystems, and both from a time and energy point of view. So the startups I have invested in have mostly been charitable ones, trying to work to really give something back. We have a new charity that actually my wife just launched, which is an amazing idea around basically enabling people to donate designer clothes and have it go to a charity of their choosing and getting a full tax deduction all automatically taken care of for them. To really try to help organizations like the Special Olympics we're working with, et cetera, but any organization be able to raise money for charity. If folks are interested, if I can put a plug in, it's called Union and Fifth, and it's a great new idea. That's the sort of place that I've been investing my time and money.
That's terrific.
Fantastic. Well, it's Vala. It's unfortunately that time again. This could go on. This conversation could go on for a long time.
That was the fastest 46 minutes of my week. And Alan, you dropped a lot of science on us. Thank you so much. Incredible thought leader, and thank you very much for spending a Friday afternoon with us.
Well, Vala and Mike, all I can think is that, having learned in the past and gotten to this point by watching your show, hopefully being on it will just make it that much better. So
it's CXO-Talk. There you go. Well, we have been talking with Alan Trefler, who is the CEO of Pegasystems. He bootstrapped the company 30 years ago. It's a $600 billion company now. I am Michael Krigsman. This has been episode 104 of CXO-Talk with my fabulous co-host, Vala Afshar. And Vala, it is with a heavy heart and disappointment that I say goodbye to you. Until next week.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Alan. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody, for watching, and we will see you same time, same place next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.